Hello, this is Michael Tracy, and this video is going to cover some letters written by George Mallory to a 19-year-old British schoolteacher named Marjorie Holmes in 1923 and 1924. As background, after the 1922 expedition, Mallory gave a series of lectures about Mount Everest, first in England, traveling to numerous different cities over a period of about 7 weeks. He gave about 2 or 3 lectures each week. Then in the beginning of 1923, he traveled to the United States and Canada to continue the tour, and he gave approximately a dozen more lectures. The gist of the lectures was that although the official reason for climbing Mount Everest was to collect rock samples from the summit to resolve a geological question, Mallory's personal reasons were more for a sense of adventure. The following is from the Harvard Crimson, where he gave a lecture, and this was printed in February of 1923. Mr. Mallory introduced his speech by asking, "What is the purpose of climbing Mount Everest?" He answered his question by saying in jest that it was of no use other than to fulfill the desire of geologists for a stone from the summit and to show physiologists at just what altitude human life became impossible. And this article is from the New York Times, also from 1923, discussing the lectures, and it's the source of the "because it is there" quote. But Mallory again mentions the need to collect rock samples from the summit. At the time of these lectures, Marjorie Holmes was a 19-year-old British schoolteacher who had heard about Mallory. It's not clear if she had attended one of these lectures or merely read about them in the newspapers, but in March of 1923, she wrote Mallory a fan letter, and Mallory responded. The two became pen pals, with Mallory writing a total of 10 letters to her. She kept the letters until she passed away in 1978, and copies of the letter were provided to the Royal Geographic Society in 2003 by her family, and the originals were eventually sold at auction in 2015. We don't have Holmes's letters to Mallory, just the ones that Mallory wrote to Holmes. The letters can be characterized as flirtatious, which provides some human interest to the story, but in 2 of the letters, Mallory describes information about climbing Mount Everest. Most important is a note in which Mallory sent Holmes a picture of Everest and wrote on the back, "This was taken on one of the great days of discovery, 1921, when we decided that the east face and northeast ridge were alike impossible. This image is taken from the auction house, for which I claim fair use." The other is in a letter to Miss Holmes, which was written on the ship taking him to India for the 1924 expedition. He wrote, "But here I am on the fairway again. You know we've got to do it this time, and yet it won't at all be easily done. Nor have we come to a conclusion yet as to the best way of trying to do it. Norton and I will be discussing that at length when we meet." And while Mallory goes on about whether or not oxygen will be used, Mallory had previously stated that he had not yet worked out the exact route to the summit, and this letter confirms that as of his departure in 1924, he still had not worked out a final route. Mallory's writings are contrasted with Norton's statements made after the expedition that Mallory had always intended to climb via the northeast ridge. From the previous video, Norton had destroyed the Mountain Dispatch, which put Mallory and Irvine at the 3rd step, and then he falsified the time and altitude of Odell's sighting. And here, Norton's statement that Mallory always intended to climb the ridge route is directly contradicted by Mallory's written statement, and prior statements made by Mallory about the ridge route made it highly questionable. I'll put a link to those sources in the description. However, this is the only record in which Mallory outright says the ridge route is impossible. Of course, Mallory did come up with a plan to climb the mountain, and days before his final climb, he told John Knoll, the expedition photographer, the 2 possible routes he intended to climb. Both possible routes involved climbing below the ridge to either enter and cross the couloir going up the rock band, or to cross above the couloir prior to entering and going up the snow slope. It's this second route that matches up with Odell's sighting, and the crux of that route is shown in this picture. I took this from North Col, so the angle is foreshortened. That is, the climb is steeper than what it looks like in this photo. However, you can see that relative to the 3rd step, it's less steep than the 3rd step, but still a large and difficult climbing effort. For scale, you can see the modern climbers descending the 3rd step. So this gives 2 keys to understanding the bigger picture. One, that the official purpose of the climb was to collect rock samples from the summit. Mallory traveled around the world telling thousands of people dozens of times that he was climbing Mount Everest to collect rock samples from the summit. And number 2, that Mallory had ruled out climbing the northeast ridge during his previous reconnaissance. Mallory described his 2 possible routes with sufficient detail, and neither one involved climbing the 1st or 2nd step.